Hey guys, Scott here. Today we're going to talk about the developer update for the patch that's going to hit, I believe, on October 10th. This is changes from the PTB in October, mostly the Skull Merchant and a couple of perk changes and the whole anti-face camping thing. These are the changes we are actually going to get to the live servers now from the PTB. They've modified a couple of things. Let's start with the Skull Merchant. So it seems like they're doing a couple of things, and in my opinion, from what I've briefly understood, it's both good and bad. It's good because it'll actually make the Skull Merchant better, because she was pretty bad on the PTB. She was very weak, and so this will make her stronger, which is good for the Skull Merchant players. But there's a couple of problematic things here that I think make her even less engaging to go against, and I guess we can go over that. So right now, the first part is the scanning. So the drones would rotate in a certain direction, which would mean it was a fixed direction of rotation. So if you placed it in a loop in which the correct way to run that loop was, the same direction, basically there'd be less chance of getting scanned by the actual drone itself. And that made it so even if you had a drone in the loop, you could still stay at the loop. If it was like a tall wall, like a jungle gym or something like that, you could still stay there. And it just felt super shitty to have a drone there, and it didn't even matter. Survivors just run through it, and they wouldn't be scanned enough to get locked on. So what they did now was make it so that you can actually target the drone, I believe, with your radar up, and now switch the rotation of the drone, which is cool because now it'll make it certain tiles are no longer as safe as they used to be, because you're going to have to go through the scan lines far more often to play the loop in a normal way to get a fast fault on a window. And they acknowledge that, acknowledging the the correct way to run a tile and getting a fast fault. So that's cool that they understood that part. So the problem here with that is, if there's no cooldown on that ability, we're basically going to have another night scenario where there's a drone in the loop. They go one way, you reverse it, they have to go the other way again, but then you reverse it again, and you just keep dancing back and forth like that until they get locked on or they have to leave the loop. So if there's no cooldown or anything preventing you rapidly switching the direction of that, that's going to be extremely shit to go against as a survivor, because you're just going to have to dance back and forth between the killer and the drone. Instead of it being a knight or an AI guard, it's going to be a drone that auto-damages you or puts you into deep wound and then eventually hinders you. So it's going to feel really bad as survivor if there's no cooldown. If there is a cooldown there, it'll be a bit more manageable and a bit less problematic, but they don't mention anything like that right now, so I'm a little worried about how that's going to go. But I guess we'll see if there actually is one or not. There's also now no cooldown when you recall a drone, which again, for the Skull Merchant players, will feel a lot better. And then there's also something that is a little scary too, where the drones now start scanning within 0.3 seconds instead of 1.5 seconds. So there used to be a delay where you'd set them up in the air and they'd have to set up and then they would start scanning. Now it's basically instantaneous, which in my opinion sort of incentivizes her to just chuck it up in a loop as you're chasing someone, rather than having arguably a more skillful playstyle of setting up a web of drones that people are going to run into and they're ready to go in advance. Now that seems to be like even more so, hey, just do a night thing and just chuck that shit up immediately and immediately start scanning people. So all these changes lean towards excellent for the Skull Merchant in terms of her strength. She probably will be far less of a terrible killer, but it leans more towards it being a very unengaging playstyle for Survivor. There were a couple of things that you could do to counterplay her in a loop, but it seems like a lot of these are heavily reducing that to the point where your main option is just mostly just going to be leave the loop again, which is a shame to see. So we'll see exactly what happens there. Maybe there is some cooldown and they didn't mention it specifically, but I can see how this could be very, very uninteresting to go against a survivor. Well, at the very least, being more fun to play as killer. So I don't know about that. I guess we'll see there. For the whole anti-face camping thing, they did a couple of actually really great changes in my opinion. There's now a grace period, because right when you would hook somebody, the thing would start immediately building before you even have a chance to walk away. Like the game would consider you camping for a few seconds just when you're just leaving the hook, and that was stupid. So now there's a 7-second grace period to allow you to get the hook, maybe get your bearings here where you want to go now, and then start going in that direction. So I think that's a great idea. It filling immediately was stupid, and having a grace window there is perfect. There was also another thing that people were doing. They would have something like Unbreakable and then sit under the hook. So the killer would be kind of hard pressed to leave that area because you had a guy on the ground and a guy on the hook, and they were right on top of each other. And so the killer wants to make sure the guy on the ground is not going to be, useful in some way. So he kind of has to stay there. But then at that point, now he's also camping too. So basically, they would have Unbreakable, get the save, and other killers punished for essentially making the right play, which is stupid. So now they have made it so that if you're in the dying state, it slows the meter as long as they're in the area, just to kind of counter people abusing that a bit. Now, the verticality thing, I didn't test too much on the PTB, so I'm not really familiar with how it worked on maps like the game. I assume it was very problematic based on the changes that they made. If you were on one floor under a hook, it would still be building up quite a lot. So now it's basically going from a sphere to more of like an oval, like this direction, which I think is a good idea. It's more horizontal than vertical. Again, this is more of the thing we have to see in game to actually measure if it's good or not. But I think that's probably more along a better idea to make second floor maps less problematic, because that would be really, really annoying. They actually did a couple of perk changes too. Furtive Chase was completely changed. They realized that it was useless. Now it's actually fairly interesting. When you hook the Obsession, you become undetectable and gain 5% haste for 18 seconds, which is not insignificant. I wouldn't consider this like a super top tier perk or anything, but it seems usable now. It is actually usable compared to old Furtive Chase, which essentially just didn't do anything. So yeah, I can definitely see that being usable, especially on like an indoor map. Yeah, I think that perk is actually kind of okay now. We'll see. It still has the same Obsession changing mechanic. Now, I don't think it I don't think it lowers the tear radius anymore. I think they just changed it entirely. Because usually if they say it receives a rework, they would say in addition to the original effects, but that's not mentioned at all here. It just says this is just the new effect of it. So that being said, it's significantly better than it used to be. It's an actual usable perk now, which is cool. Background player was buffed as well to give you 200% speed for 5 seconds instead of 150 in 4 seconds. So that is now the fastest survivor movement speed ability in the game, which is pretty cool. And that is going to have, like, I guess, like the same effect and duration as Plot Twist, which is, yeah, that's interesting. I never considered background player to be a super strong perk, so I think buffing that is fine to get people in position to Sabo or Flashlight save or Flashbang save or something like that. I think that's actually pretty cool. I have no problems with that. Trapper was also changed a little bit. They have made traps spawn further away from just random points on the map now. They now spawn closer to generators, so you're able to sort of patrol your objectives and pick up traps a bit easier at the start of the match, which will help Trapper quite a bit. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be in the release. They're going to patch that in probably a couple of weeks afterwards, but I think that's a good idea as well. Shattered Square, Borgo, they actually reduced the amount of pallets on the map. This may be a hot take, but I'm not sure that's actually a good idea, because I counted the pallets multiple times on the map. It wasn't that crazy. It was like 12 or 13. That's a pretty standard amount of pallets for a map. The problem was there are certain tiles that they have now that were insanely strong, where the single value of that pallet is the equivalent to like 5 junk loops. There's that one loop, this one actually in particular, where the pallet would spawn right here, and then you've got this amazing window. This thing is a nightmare. And if they remove that pallet and other pallets, I think the map becomes actually pretty killer-sided, because there really were not that many pallets on the map. Like we counted with Zanshin over and over again, and this really wasn't that many. It wasn't like, the game with 25 to 30. It was like, 10 to 15, which is, again, a pretty standard amount. It's just the strength of the loops were insanely strong. And if they gutted these loops that were insanely strong and removed other tiles as well, yeah, that actually might lean towards killer side a bit. But again, we'll see. There's a lot of RNG in the game. Maybe like the 4 or 5 times I counted, I just got really bad RNG for the survivors, and then maybe there could be way more. I still think there shouldn't be that much of a range on a map. You shouldn't be able to have 8 pallets or 19. It's just stupid. But that's neither here nor there. Other than that, that's pretty much it. Most of these changes are good. I'm still concerned about Skull Merchant. It's much better for Skull Merchant players, the changes that they're making, but I'm still really worried about her counterplay being very, very uninteresting. But I guess we'll see when it hits live. Thanks for watching.